Gundam Evolution has been out for a very short while at this point, not including the beta period that we had. And even though it would be incredibly stupid for me or anyone to say that this game is competitively balanced, competitively viable, esports ready, as they say, we've already had a couple of events so far, right? We've had the content creator, streamer events with Twitch rivals, and then the showdown, I forget the official name, but there was like the official Gundam Evolution one. But we're also starting to see the beginnings of grassroots tournaments take place. And even though this is still in the early days, I thought it would be fun, and I at least was interested in looking at what looks to be the beginnings of the development of the competitive scene in terms of meta. Now, I want to first preface this with a couple of things. I'm not going to be talking about maps or game modes here. We have too few maps for each game mode for me to be comfortable making a proper designation on what is or is not competitively viable. That is going to have to be one that's going to be tested out by the community, as well as we have to wait for more maps to come out in the first place before we can really delve into that. What I'm going to be talking about here is strictly team compositions and units, and where I think they all fall, and like the uses and what's going to be used more, what's not going to be used as much, all that sort of thing. And also, before I go into talking about all these different units, I want to sort of give an overall observation on this game as a hero shooter compared to other hero shooters, mostly like Overwatch as well as TF2, though I should say I don't have as much recent experience with Team Fortress 2, and I was never particularly involved in the competitive scene then anyway. So a lot of this is going to be a combination of my experience with games like Overwatch as well as other FPS games like Counter-Strike and PUBG, and sort of like how those games work, and as well as MOBAs and how all those different units and all that work. So anyway, all that out of the way, a lot of this is just going to be based off of initial observation as well as guesses and conjecture and predictions. So, but this is not gospel. None of this is going to be gospel. This is just me giving my thoughts. So that being said, we also should talk about how this game in a hero shooter is going to have a lot less foundational roles and classes compared to games like Overwatch, right? I think a good way to look at it is, this is again sort of going off of feel, partly because we don't really have actual numbers from the game yet. We don't know exactly like, oh, well, Exia's left click does this much damage, right? Everyone in this game is DPS, essentially. Everyone does massive amounts of damage, some close range, some far range, but I feel like it's almost like if you were to drop any of these units into Overwatch, they would all be considered DPS because that's how much damage this game just happens to have. And then of course there's also that affects the time to kill, and that balances around that as well. But when I say things like tank or support or DPS, this isn't a full sort of like, oh, this person's job is to just stand there and soak up damage. No, they're also going to be outputting a lot of damage. It's just what extra do they bring to the composition? Like what, it's not a full, like I only tank, it's ideal damage, but I also can tank a little bit more than other people. And so that leaves a lot of room for a lot of this, and why I don't think we're going to be seeing as much set team comps. But that's going to be, I think, my last point that I'm going to get into that, what I mean about that. So first off, the main units that I'm seeing in competitive play, the first one and the most important one is Sazabi. Sazabi is the tankiest unit in the game, highest health pool, biggest shield. I think the shield recharges slower than other units like GM, but he is significantly tankier, partly because his damage at close range with his shotgun, as well as just his size. He is actively there blocking a lot of bullets, which does mean that you do need to take a look at your health, right? Because it's easy to get hit by everything. But it means that if you are going to be playing that sort of forward position, trying to be taking that space, you just have the presence to be able to do that. Especially because he has his axe and he can actually fly into that space to take it. And if he has backup behind him, even if he does go down, he's going to be just creating so much space for his team that it's just a very good forward aggressive player. But his shield also allows him to just hold positions in a very, very strong way. When you compare him to other tanks like Jim has a lot of staying power, but with his healing grenade as well as his shield, and he also has his fire grenade, right, which also helps, but he's more of a sort of like fighter bruiser position is what it feels like. He doesn't have as much actual tanking, protecting, shielding in terms of shielding his teammates. You can see that on green screen right now. Shielding his teammates like Jim, or sorry, like a Sazabi does. So that's why I think Sazabi is just going to be the must pick unit in this game right now because of that space creation, oppressive, forward, aggressive nature that he can bring. The next unit is just behind Sazabi in terms of must pick is Methus, the healer. And the reason why is because when you contrast Methus to the other support leaning units like Unicorn as well as Dom, who you can kind of consider an off support. I'm not going to consider Pale Rider's healing as a support. That's sort of just like a secondary thing, right? As the same thing with Jim, like that heal grenade is just, it's a little grenade, right? But I think Dom is the only one you can consider like an off support, and then Unicorn is like a primary support. The difference between Unicorn and Methus is that Unicorn can heal more, but Methus single heal is faster. But I think more importantly than the speed that Methus gives, is that Unicorn needs everyone to stack up on them to give all the heal, which even though there is that shield ability they can have that also increases tankiness, it does mean that you're positionally very, very limited on using Unicorn in that supporting way. It can be useful in certain situations for sure, but I think that Methus has a lot more variety in what he can bring and what the team can do with it. You can stand out and flank. You can also stay close in as well, and he just needs to tap on who he's healing and all that good stuff. But it gives a lot more options and just a lot more versatile. And not to mention that the actual mobility of the unit itself for Methus is significantly higher than Unicorn. So with Unicorn, everyone's stacked up on them. You just focus the Unicorn, and Unicorn cannot get away, and suddenly the healing is all dead. Methus, if you try and focus him down instead of who he is healing, whether it's Sazabi or another DPS unit, Methus will just fly away, he'll back away, and then that unit will be dealing damage to you, counter damage the entire time. So it's a lot harder to deal with and actually get rid of. And even though you can argue that pushing a unit out of the fight is just as good as killing them, we all know that that's not actually true because it doesn't take them all that long to heal back up and get right into the fight compared to the spawn time and then having to run from the spawn itself. So being able to actually finish the unit is incredibly strong, and Unicorn is significantly easier to finish than a Methus, which is probably, I don't know if that's more important than the healing, than the fact that Unicorn technically heals more than Methus, but it all sort of adds in together, and I just think Methus is very, very powerful. Like the Sazabi Methus combination, I think, is going to be the benchmark of every single team. It's what you play around it that's going to be the big question. Because I just mentioned Sazabi and Methus, I did want to quickly throw in a conversation quickly about Dom Trooper, who is sort of a pseudo support, but also a pseudo tank. And I think Dom Trooper is really good to play in conjunction with your main support and tank of Sazabi and Methus, but you don't want to use Dom Trooper to replace them because the tankiness of Dom Trooper is limited. He doesn't have the shield, right? Even though he does have a high health pool. And then the supportingness of his armor gun is limited because it does add a lot of armor, but it automatically starts fading. It has a long cooldown. You can't really keep more than one person armored up at the same time, and so it's very good in conjunction with all these other abilities that you have with the Methus and the Sazabi, but you don't want to use it to replace. Even though, however, this might seem that I'm shitting on Dom Trooper, I think Dom Trooper is a very, very good secondary sort of tank support unit because it has one of the strongest ults in the game. If you have to push in a single, especially if you're on attack and you need to push into an area to take a point or whatever it is, that ultimate, if you have the team backing up behind you, makes the push almost virtually unstoppable, right? But without that ult, it's a little more limited, and it's more just like the secondary supporty. The secondary unit with when it's either a tank or healing / shielding, supporting, whatever. Next point I wanted to mention was melee units and how powerful that they can be. The reason why I think melee units are particularly powerful, and you see at least one, sometimes two on every single team, is because of the lack of stuns in this game. It's incredibly hard to keep a unit locked down, which you can focus fire them down, right? You can delete anyone really quickly in this game compared to other hero shooters or MOBAs with sort of similar strategic dynamics. But with no stun, any unit can really get in and start to deal a lot of damage, and you can't just lock them down, which means that units like Exia especially are incredibly powerful. Exia's mobility means that if you spend resources trying to track him down, if unless your aim is tracking him perfectly, which even for the best players is impossible because we're not robots, it's a lot of resources utilized to try and just take this one unit out that unit's backline is also dealing damage to you. And then there's Zaku Melee as well, who doesn't have all the mobility, but he has all this staying power because of his own shielding, not only his rage bar shield, but his literal like arm shielding the front of him. And then of course his actual stalling, his we totally didn't steal this from May guy's ability, where he just doesn't take any damage and in fact builds up his rage meter with it. Like, it's just hard to get rid of him. He's not going to be doing as much damage. He's not going to be getting as many kills, sans ultimate, that Exia is, but he's just going to be causing so much disruption that he's something you just really need to take care of. Barbatos is the third melee unit, and I don't expect to see Barbatos. We haven't seen Barbie all that much in competitive play so far. I don't expect to see him a lot, because even though it's a unit that can cause so much havoc in lower level casual play, because he is so binary, where it's either he gets the kill or he doesn't, if you know how to play around a Barbie, he gets blown up easily. You just gotta you gotta listen for the charge, dash away, and then focus fire him, and he is down and he is out. And yeah, that sounds, oh, just kill him first, right? I mean, you could say that about Exia and even a little bit about Zaku Melee, but it's not nearly the same. Exia has a lot more mobility and even just ranged harassment than Barbatos does. Barbie has like one move, and you can just wait it out. So I don't think we're going to be seeing a lot of Barbie play in competitive much at all until he gets nerfed or changed. It's like he's like Fizz from League, or I guess Master Yi is a better example of that, where because of the lack of coordination and communication in lower level, even just solo queue play can easily do a lot of work, and organized competitive play probably going to get countered really easily. So I expect to see Exia on every team and maybe a Zaku Melee depending on the composition, depending on the map, but no Barbie at all. And the last point I wanted to talk about, which is I teased in the beginning, is this sort of idea of like the different roles. I don't expect role lock to be a thing, because these roles don't really truly exist in the way that they did in Overwatch or even TF2, from my understanding. And that means that, okay, come with me on this ride for a little bit. There's a sort of a binary, not a binary, but it's a graph on two sides of mechanical skill expression and strategic skill expression. Because of the way of how impactful individual abilities, non-ultimate abilities can be in Overwatch, it meant that so much of the game was decided about how do you stack these different abilities, and that leans a lot more into strategic skill expression. Whereas a game like Counter-Strike or Call of Duty is almost virtually 100% mechanical skill expression. I think Gundam Evolution lies somewhere in the middle. Maybe even leans a little more towards mechanical skill expression, because it is a shooter at the end of the day. And the abilities, the non-G abilities, the non-ultimate abilities, they can be useful, but they're not like the most powerful for the most part. And so that means that it's not necessarily about figuring out what combination of abilities does like the rock, paper, scissors victory over the opponent. It's more, what do you as an individual, what can you get out of it, which means that as an individual with their own style can find a unit, even if, so for example, even if like Sniper is by far the greatest, like objectively best pick on a certain position on a certain map, if one player is like better with Gundam, then you would lean towards that, because they can just get a lot more out of it. It allows for the more individualistic style of play to reveal itself in the way that mechanical skill expression is balanced against strategic skill expression. We'll see if that maintains. It did take a while for the GOATS meta in Overwatch to really like take off, and for that sort of combination to break the game, as it were. So this, what I was just saying might age really poorly, but that's what I'm feeling right now in the very beginning. But again, this is all in the very beginning, so who knows how much of this is actually going to last at all, right? But that sort of idea about different players playing different units to different leveling degrees because of the mechanical requirements for success on most, if not all, units. That means that I don't think we're going to be seeing any sort of set composition where it's going to be the same 6 versus the same 6. I think the map is going to ask for different things, and that's going to lean teams and players one way or another. And then, of course, there is just what is the individual player good at. So we might be seeing some mirror matchups, because partly there are only so few units in the game, and there is going to be times that a unit is inarguably more powerful than another in a certain set situation, but I don't imagine that we're going to be getting more than like 3 or 4 guaranteed mirror matchups right now. At least like in the long term, once things get fleshed out and things get balanced a little bit more. It's going to be a lot of things are going to be decided more by the maps. And it also means that even if there are units like Mahiru is one of those that I cannot imagine how to play them in a universal sense. If there's a very specific niche situation, whether it's usually a very specific point on a map that they can lock down, you'll be seeing it then. And so at least the map will create some diversity, if not the actual players on the opposing teams themselves creating the unit diversity in the competitive matchups. Now, if I had to give a generalized when in doubt, pick these 6, it would probably be Sazabi, Methus, Dom Trooper, Pale Rider, because Pale Rider is just so flexible in what he can do. And then what was that? So Dom Trooper, Methus, Sazabi, Pale Rider. I'd also Exia, and then that 6th slot you can go Zakuto melee as well if you want a little bit more beefiness, or even a sniper or a Gundam if you want a little bit more long ranged. That one, or even Ashimar if there's more like open area where like that 6th slot is really going to be dependent on the map, especially if none of the other ones are, though of course they can be as well. But who knows? Maybe some tech will be discovered for a unit or some sort of combination that just gets undefeated, and maybe all of this whole video will be completely useless in a few weeks. We'll see. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the current development of the competitive scene of Gundam Evolution. If you want to stay with me and see how accurate I am, feel free to subscribe, and we will go on this journey together. And until the next video, have a great day.